Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome again to virtual seminars for Precambrian geology. Today we have a presentation by Dr. Rob Rainbird titled Old Mushrooms to Meteorite Impacts, Highlights from a Geological Transect Along the Coppermine River, Canadian Arctic, which sounds like it was a very intense time out on canoes for 3 weeks. So I'm excited for this one. Next week, we're going to have a presentation by Dr. Sally Pearson. And then we only have 2 left. We'll have Gordon Love from UCR and Jeff Moyan from Stellenbosch University. So, and that will be on, those will be December 1st, December 8th, and then we'll end for the holidays and come back with Paul again on January 6th, kicking us off for the new year, Paul Hoffman. So today we'll go as usual. We'll have a 45-minute presentation, and then people can ask questions either by typing into the chat. You can type a star into the chat, and or raise your hand virtually, and I'll try to address everybody in the order that all of that comes. But with that, Andre is going to go ahead and introduce Rob for us today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to introduce Rob. Rob did his, I guess, undergraduate and master degree at Carleton University with some break working for mining industry. His master degree was on Huronian supergroup, and it's something he continues to do. And he has a student now funded by NSERC working on upper part of Huronian. For his and his master degree was with L. Donaldson, one of the major Precambrian sedimentologist stratigrapher of Canada. For PhD, he moved to Western Ontario University, worked with Grant Young on Shale Group in Arctic Canada. And at that time, he started to be interested in reconstructions between Siberia and Canada and North America. And he then continued with postdoc at Geological Survey of Canada, and eventually got a position at Geological Survey of Canada. And he came to Geological Survey of Canada in a sort of transitional time when in 80s a number of studies were done, a number of people worked on sedimentology stratigraphy in various Proterozoic basins, ending up with a Bible of Canadian geology of Proterozoic basins. And by early 90s and mid 90s, many of them retired or left Geological Survey. And so Rob came and became like a Precambrian sedimentologist in Geological Survey of Canada. He picked up geochronology. So one of his major tools became detrital zircon geochronology. And it led to one of the studies that he continued over years, sort of erosion of sediments from Greenville Mountains and transport through Canada. And he worked through whole Proterozoic of Canada, from Paleoproterozoic, Mesoproterozoic to Neoproterozoic. And I guess he presents today new data of his work on in last few years. So with this, Rob, I pass to you. And I guess you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, so unmute and then screen share.
And it should be in your, hopefully in your left bottom corner. Okay, I think you're unmuted.
Okay, how's that?
Okay, yeah. Great, yeah, everything's
Does that
working.
look good?
Yeah,
yeah.
Go right ahead,
Well,
thank you.
Okay, well, thanks, Andre, for that lengthy introduction. it's pretty accurate what you said. So yeah, I've been working on Proterozoic basins in Canada for most of my career, and I've been very lucky because the survey has funded me to go to a lot of fantastic places, particularly in the Arctic, some of which I'll talk about today. So the work I'm going to talk about was funded by the GSC's Geomapping for Energy and Minerals program, which we call GEM. But we also got about 50% of our funding for this particular project from the Agaron Institute, which is a private American organization that funds research in geobiology. This is a map, obviously, of North America, northern states and Canada, showing the distribution of late Paleoproterozoic to Neoproterozoic sedimentary basins, and broken down into sequences of different ages. And the next map I'm going to show you is of this area. So I'm going to focus in on northwestern Canada and the basins up there. So this map shows the distribution of late Paleoproterozoic to Neoproterozoic inliers, which contain strata of that age that back in 1979, Grant Young divided into 3 sequences, which he termed A, B, and C. Now, these sequences are regionally correlative sequences, and they're separated by regional unconformities that could be tied to major orogenic episodes. In previous GEM projects, I did work up on Victoria Island in the Minto Inlier in the early 2010s. And I'm just trying to get my laser pointer going here. Okay, up in here. And then natural progression was to go over to the Brock Inlier here, where there were similar rocks exposed. And the area I'm going to talk about today here is called or what's colloquially known as the Coppermine Homocline, but it's actually not a homocline, so we just call it the Coppermine area. So this is the focus of my talk today. So the objectives of our project were to upgrade the existing 1 1/4 million mapping that had been done in the 50s and 60s by helicopter. And we're using now ground-based observations along with remotely sensed imaging for making our maps. And I just finally got back into the office and started working on my map for this area. We also wanted to collect detailed stratigraphic information to inform correlations between the Northern Cordillera, the Northern mainland, and Canadian Arctic Islands. We also wanted to collect specimens of sandstone for doing detrital zircon geochronology and research on fluid flow related to uranium and copper mineralization. And we also wanted to sample a complete section through a very thick flood basalt sequence, which is part of the Mackenzie large igneous province, to investigate its origins and the source of native copper in it. And last but not least, we wanted to look for signs of eukaryotic life, microfossils in the early Mesoproterozoic strata of the Hornby Bay basin. So this is a composite section from that region, and it's an amazing section. I mean, it's not contiguous like that, but you can piece it all together bit by bit, and we're looking at basically 1 billion years of stratigraphy, all 12 kilometers of stratigraphy covering 1 billion years from about 1.7 to 0.7 GA. And in the middle, the unconformity between sequence A and sequence B, there is a break of approximately 200 million years, and that separates the Hornby Bay basin from the Amundsen basin. So now the section that's actually exposed in the Coppermine River transect is shown here, and that section is roughly drawn on here. So I'll now zoom in to the Coppermine area in the next slide. So this is a map that was compiled by my colleague Tom Skulski from GSC, and it takes in mapping done by Bob Barger and Al Donaldson in the late 1960s, and then later work by Donaldson's graduate students at Carleton University, Charlie Cairns and Jerry Ross. The oldest rocks in the map area are shown here in pink, and those are the Paleoproterozoic Wakme origin. These are unconformably overlain by mainly clastic sedimentary rocks of the Hornby Bay basin here, the Hornby Bay group shown in tan. These strata are unconformably overlain by mainly carbonate sedimentary rocks of the Dismal Lakes group here shown in turquoise. And these are conformably overlain by a thick succession of flood basalt dated at 1270 million years approximately, the Coppermine River Group shown in green. These pass conformably upward into a sequence of fluvial red sandstones and intercalated basalts shown in orange. And then we had a period of uplift and faulting and erosion and deposition of the Rae Group, which is the basal unit of the Amundsen basin. The Rae Group strata were then intruded by diabase sills of the Franklin Large Igneous Province at 720 million years. And then another period of erosion, the Great Unconformity, as it's called, and then deposition of lower Paleozoic Cambro-Ordovician sandstones and carbonates. So the only fieldwork for this project was done during a 3-week period in July of 2017. It was a 220 kilometer canoe trip down the Kendall and Coppermine rivers. Here's the route that we took, starting off in Dismal Lakes, down the Kendall River and into the Coppermine River, and eventually ending up at the hamlet of Kugluktuk on the Coronation Gulf. So we were a group of 12 people and 6 canoes, including 4 whitewater river guides who helped us set up camps along the river. We made stops every 2 to 3 days and would work from those camps and get as much done as we could, then hop back in the canoes and move downstream to the next spot. And it was a real group effort because we had specialists in all kinds of different types of geology. So we had igneous petrologists doing sedimentology and sedimentologists doing igneous petrology. So it was a great learning experience for everyone. Now, we are not by far the first people to have done a trip like this before. This is the cover of a book called Lands Forlorn, and it's an account of a canoe expedition done on the Coppermine River by a guy named George Douglas, his brother, and a geologist friend who were searching for minerals that had been reported by the explorer Samuel Hearne in the watershed of the Coppermine River. So they wanted to go and check this out. So their first attempt in 1911, they started in Edmonton and worked their way up the Mackenzie River into Great Bear Lake, and then fought their way up to the Dismal Lakes, and then they got caught by the weather and they had to back out and build a cabin on the north shore of Great Bear Lake, and then try again in the spring. So they had quite a tough time, but they made it the next summer and were able to get some work done. So interesting book. I'd highly recommend it for someone to read. So I'll start off with the stratigraphy of the transect, and of course we'll start at the bottom with the Hornby Bay basin and the Hornby Bay group and overlying Dismal Lakes group. So the Hornby Bay group can be divided into 4 unconformity bounded sequences, just A1 to A4 I call them. And the nomenclature here is in a state of flux because a guy named Paul Ramakers had been working in here, and he's renamed some of the formations. And poor Paul passed away in the spring, and he was in the middle of revising this. So one of us is going to have to pick up the reins and try and get this done. But these are the old names for now. So starting at the base, what's called the Big Bear Formation, it's represents fault control deposition exemplified by coarse alluvial fan and proximal high energy braided stream deposits. The age of these rocks is not well constrained, but we have detrital zircon data which suggests that the rocks are younger than 1800 million years. And some of the rocks are cut by these cleaver dikes, which have been dated at 1740. Sequence A2 represents deposition of a more widely distributed braided fluvial system with consistent westerly paleocurrents. The photo shows a local unconformity between Aeolian sandstones of the Big Bear Formation and braided river sandstones of the Lady Nye Formation. The detrital zircon geochronology here gives us a maximum depositional age of around 1720 MA. Just to back out a bit, the Hornby Bay group sandstones are very similar in age and composition and stratigraphy to better studied units here in the Athabasca and Thelon basins, where I've also worked. And these similarities listed here, along with the paleocurrent data, which is very consistent among all of the basin, suggests that they might have been deposited by a contiguous terrestrial sand sheet. And these are just erosional remnants of a much, much bigger system, which had its origins in the mountains of the Trans-Hudson origin to the east. So moving back to look at the rocks, then the braided river deposits fine upward and transition into more heterolithic shallow marine deposits of the East River and Karatok formations. And in the western part of the basin, these are intercalated with intermediate to felsic volcanic rocks of the Narake volcanic complex, which has been dated at 1663 million years ago by Sam Bowering and Jerry Ross. The upper part of the Hornby Bay group is cut by these mafic magmatic rocks known as the Western Channel Diabase, so that provides an upper age limit on the Hornby Bay group. So the strata of the Hornby Bay group were uplifted and folded during a deformation episode, which has been termed the forward orogeny. And this deformation can be traced all the way through the subsurface into the northern Cordillera Mountains, where it is known as the Racklin orogeny. So this is an image here showing the basal units of the Dismal Lakes group lying unconformably unfolded Hornby Bay group rocks here. So it's the basal unit is called the LaRue Formation. So here's a picture of some of the LaRue Formation sandstones. It's interpreted to be fluvial at its base, but quickly moves up into mature, shallow subtidal sandstones like the ones showed in this picture. They pass gradationally upward into carbonaceous shales and thin sandstones interpreted as tidal flat deposits. The interface between these two units is recognized as a redox front, and this has been important for mineral exploration because the area is being looked at quite extensively for roll front or stratiform type uranium, which is a good thing because they left behind all kinds of drill core, which we've been able to use. So getting to that, one of the problems with working in the stratigraphy of a cratonic basin like this is that you seldom find tuff horizons from which zircon grains can be extracted for uranium lead dating. So fortunately, another method for dating has emerged over the past 10 or 15 years, provides reliable, although less precise depositional ages, and that's rhenium osmium dating. And this is largely being pioneered by Rob Creaser at the University of Alberta. Now, the drill core tends to work best for this because it's less altered. And luckily, there's lots of it around in this area from uranium exploration, as I suggested. And there are two different methods that one can use here. One of them looks at rhenium isotopes from the organic matter in the shales, and then another measures it in the sulfide minerals that occur in some of these shales, such as pyrite. So initially we sent samples of the shales to Alan Rooney at Yale, but unfortunately the rhenium content of the shales was too low, and I think it's just because the rocks are just a bit too high metamorphic grade. So the rhenium content was under 5 ppb, which I think is a threshold for this kind of work. But This wasn't a total bust because in reading some of the assessment reports by the mining companies from this area, I found a very good rhenium osmium age from pyrite of about 1440 million years. The pyrite in this sample is coarse and it infills sand-filled cineresis cracks, so that they're clearly early diagenetic, but this gives us a minimum age for the Fort Confidence Formation. The maximum age is given to us by the Western Channel diabase, which is truncated beneath the Larue Formation at this unconformity. So the remainder of the Dismal Lakes group is largely a succession of shallow water carbonates and siltstones containing some exquisite examples of stromatolites. There's a couple of examples here. The section is punctuated by a couple of unconformities that could represent considerable periods of time, given the minimum age for the Fort Confidence Formation of 1440 and the age of the conformably overlying flood basalts of the Coppermine River Group at 1270. Here are some spectacular conophyton stromatolites from the Selkie Formation that Charlie Cairns worked on and Linda Kay later on. These have been interpreted as slightly deeper water forms. Their conical form presents greater surface area, so apparently they can form in deeper water. At least that's the party line on conophyton. So I mentioned before that we were funded by the Agron Institute to look for signs of eukaryotic life in these rocks. These are images from an early study by Bob Horodisky. This one showing unicellular prokaryotic cyanobacteria from cherts that they got from the carbonates. And in the shales, they found these filamentous sheaths, which are probably fragments of microbial mats. But again, these are prokaryotes, so they didn't find any eukaryotes back in the early days. But enter Corentin and Laurent, a PhD student from Belgium who was working with Emmanuel Javot. We got him on the project and brought him up there, and he collected about quite a few pounds of shales and cherts from the Dismal Lakes group, and found 12 species of eukaryotes in the shales from the Fort Confidence Formation. And these are some examples. The difference between these is that between them and the prokaryotic cells is that they're multicellular, and they have more complex cell wall structures, which distinguish them from prokaryotes. Okay, I'm going to change gears now and look at the rocks of the Mackenzie Large Igneous Province, which can be divided into three components. The basal, the rocks shown in red here are the Mackenzie Dike Swarm, which stretches from the Coronation Gulf here all the way down to northern Ontario and across over to as far as Baffin Island off the edge of this map. The next component is the Coppermine River flood basalts, here shown conformably overlying the Dismal Lakes group, a succession over 2.5 kilometers thick of flood basalts. And it's important to point out that there are equivalents of those rocks over here in Bathurst Inlet, and perhaps all the way over here on Baffin Island, 1,000 kilometers away. So it was a very extensive flood basalt province. And the last component of the Mackenzie lip is the muskox intrusion, which is a kind of carrot-shaped layered mafic, ultramafic intrusion that feeds into the lower flows of the Copper Creek Formation. So the Coppermine River Group comprises the Copper Creek Formation, as I mentioned, which are the mafic lavas, here shown in green, and then the conformably overlying Husky Creek Formation, which is mainly a sandstone with intercalated basalt flows. And the down dip extension of these rocks is really unknown because they're to the north, they're covered, so they could be extremely extensive. Tom Skulski, my colleague at the survey, has been the main lead on the research on these rocks, and he's reanalyzed some of the rocks collected by Bob Barriger back in the late 60s, and those are those blue dots on the map. And he collected some of his own samples on our trip. So those are the ones shown in yellow, the transects shown in yellow. And then he also incorporated some data from a student named James Day from U of A, who worked with Graham Pearson. So here's what the flood basalts look like in the field. As I mentioned, they're at least 2.5 kilometers thick, with more than 120 individual basalt flows that can be traced for 10 to 30 kilometers along strike. They're characterized by cliff forming flow interiors and recessive rusty weathering flow tops. And here they show quite nicely on this Arctic DEM. So Tom used chemical stratigraphy to subdivide the Copper Creek Formation into 3 members, the Stony Creek, September Creek, and Bird Creek members. The lower September Creek member shows evidence for crustal contamination, including local physical assimilation of crustal xenoliths, low epsilon neodymium values, and elevated thorium to niobium ratios. The overlying members have positive epsilon neodymium values and elevated thorium niobium ratios. And they also have very similar values to the Mackenzie dikes that feed into them. So that's kind of interesting. The overlying Stony Creek member is defined by a smooth upsection increase in titanium oxide with a maximum value of 4%, marking the top of the member. And it also has distinctive trace element ratios, notably lower zirconium to yttrium and zirconium to niobium relative to the underlying members. So Tom's work has really identified 3 new stratigraphic members within the Copper Creek Formation. And these boundaries have been constrained by these chemical point data. So what he did then was, once he identified the member boundaries, he used satellite imagery and this Arctic DEM to draw in the member contacts for our mapping. So this is what the map looks like now if we add the members of the Copper Creek Formation in there. So I'm in the process of compiling these data to make a new map for this area, incorporating some of this new information. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit more about the Mackenzie lip and its origins. So the available geochronology for the Mackenzie lip points to rapid emplacement of one of the world's largest continental magmatic provinces. So we want to ask ourselves how such an event happened and how were these rocks emplaced? And the most current wisdom is that the magmatism was triggered by the arrival of a large mantle plume at the base of the lithosphere. But there's some stuff out there. Papers have come out recently talking about some of these lips being triggered by a bolide impact, followed by a time-dependent mantle response. So I want to explore the possibility of the Mackenzie lip possibly being related to a bolide impact. And for this, I'm going to take you on a little side excursion to the Wellington Inlier up here on Victoria Island, where I did a little mapping project in 1994 with my GSC colleague, Tony Lecheminant, who sadly passed away last summer. And as a few of you who know Tony well will know, he was an amazing igneous petrologist and had a particular fondness for mafic dikes. So this is a picture of Tony in 1994 standing in a hole dug by a barren land grizzly who was pretty hungry and looking for Richardson ground squirrels. During our mapping there, Tony discovered many dikes and sills of various ages and orientations, but this one, which he initially dubbed the mystery dike, caught his attention. And we now call it the Washburn dike. So here it is here. And yeah, that's Wellington Inlier, and a little excerpt of the map. So you have some Proterozoic sediments of the Ellis Formation here intruded by this dike, and you also have some sills of the Franklin. There's also some other Mackenzie dikes kicking around the area. So the Washburn dike is a single 20-meter wide and 600-meter long exposure. It's a one-off. The host rock is a fine grained granophyre with micrographic texture and nearly 10% iron titanium oxides. There are granite and quartz-rich sandstone xenoliths up to 1 meter in diameter, which comprise about 20 to 50% of this intrusion. Sandstone xenoliths tend to be more angular and have sharp contacts with the host rock, whereas the granite class are more rounded with complex and diffuse boundaries. And the granite xenoliths are variably melted and recrystallized. And now I'm going to show you some petrographic work that Tony did, and I'm going to be kind of reading some of his notes on this because this gets into some pretty detailed stuff, which Tony was noted for, but I think it's important to show you these textures that he found. So the Washburn dikes preserve a wide range of petrographic features indicative of disequilibrium melting, very high temperatures and rapid cooling. And these processes resulted in extensive clast melt and melt-melt interactions. So significant reactions occurred between the host melt and the relic phases such as quartz, feldspar, and titanium oxides. And the melts generated within the granitic class interacted with the carrier melt, producing distinctive mineralogy and textures, including rimmed quartz and checkerboard feldspar. And these are things that were described in this early paper by Bischoff and Stopfler from a known impact crater in Finland. So Tony recognized these in the Washburn Lake dike. And these are also well-preserved features in other melt rocks, such as those from Vredefort, Manicouagan, and the Carswell impact in Saskatchewan. The bottom left shows a thin section offcut of a granite xenolith and the adjacent ground mass from the Washburn dike. A is a thin section made from that slab. Note that the quartz grains with their thin reaction rims form promontories, whereas partly melted feldspar grains are eroded more easily, producing embayments. And B is a melted granite xenolith from East Clearwater, which is a known Permian age meteorite impact from northern Quebec with similar features. C is a relic quartz core enclosed by a reaction rim of iron-rich biotite, chlorite, and quartz. And D shows checkerboard plagioclase, a sieve textured class broken into pieces. It's partly sealed by a thin plagioclase rim and enclosed by carried feldspar quartz granophyre. E is a close-up of the broken class from image D, and F is a blow-up of E, showing the thin plagioclase separating rectangular subgrains within the checkerboard plagioclase class from the case feldspar quartz granophyre in the surrounding host rock. So this is the same rock here. On the left, we have an SEM backscatter image highlighting part of the interior of the same granitic class and its enclosing fine-grained host melt, shown on the right. Amoeboid, partly melted quartz grains in black are separated from the relic feldspar cores in medium gray by fully recrystallized melt channels, shown in light gray. The box outlines the area shown in image B. Image C shows the feldspar cores and melt channels in more detail. In image D, the fluidal feldspar contains euhedral spinels between the two melt channels. These are shown in progressively greater and greater detail in images E and G. The spinel crystals are spatially distributed within the granitic class and are preserved only within islands of fluidal feldspar surrounded by fully recrystallized melt channels. Euhedral conundrum. corundum crystals are interpreted as the first solid condensate from vapor or melt trapped within the channels in partly melted feldspars. So according to Tony, the occurrence of neocrystallized corundum and spinel crystals in the partly melted class are indicative of high pressures and extremely high temperatures exceeding 1100 degrees. Now, I think people would agree with me. One of Tony's greatest research contributions was his ability to recognize battleite or zirconium oxide in coarse grain mafic intrusions, and work that he did with Larry Heeman in dating many rocks across Canada and elsewhere. And the Washburn Dike was no exception. This led him to investigate melt rocks from confirmed impact structures in search of battleite and other zirconium-rich minerals. So he found battleite in samples from the Vredefort, Manicouagan, Carswell, and even more recently in the Charlevoix impact near Montreal. And he was working on getting all of those data. So Tony found battleite in the Washburn Lake Dike, and he gave it to Mike Hamilton at U of T, who dated them at approximately 1271 million years. And this provides a robust link between the Washburn Dike and the early history of the Mackenzie Lip. So going back to this map again, I want to draw your attention to these gravity anomalies labeled 1 to 5. And they enclose the focal point of this Mackenzie dike swarm. And a student at Carleton University working with Richard Ernst Blanchard suggested that the anomalies are caused by an up to 7 kilometer thick, dense, west dipping magnetic body, probably a large igneous intrusion of Mackenzie age. Now, if you look here at the gravity low data, I don't think you have to squint too hard to see that it forms an arc that, if extended, generates a circle of about 500 kilometers. And this arc parallels the proposed zero edge of the Amundsen Basin, which is the basin that overlies it and was formed beginning around 1100 million years ago. So if this is the edge of an impact crater, it would be the largest impact crater on Earth. Now, there's two other pieces of evidence that I want to run by you. And one of those is the fact that we have Archean inliers located here in the Washburn Lake area where the dike comes from, as well as way up here on Hadley Bay on Victoria Island. And you've got to understand that this area is really, it's all covered by Paleozoic rocks. And all of a sudden you have this uplift of Slave Province way up here on Victoria Island. So I'm suggesting this could be a rim uplift related to an impact. Another piece of evidence came up when I was working on my PhD thesis on Victoria Island. I worked on a number of different sandstone units from the Neoproterozoic rocks that occur here up in the Minto Inlier. And I found shocked detrital quartz in several thin sections. I think I found 4 or 5 grains that looked like this with these shock lamellae. So these sandstones were deposited by rivers that flowed northwesterly right over this area where this possible impact occurred. So the interpretation then would be the Washburn Dike could be analogous to a Sudbury offset dike, or perhaps the Vredefort Granophyre dikes from the 2 largest known impacts on Earth. Okay, back to Earth now. We'll progress a little further up into the stratigraphy of the Coppermine River Group into the Husky Creek Formation, which is about a 1,200 meter plus thick succession of sandstones and intercalated flood basalt, or basalts known as the Husky Creek Formation. And the contact between the flood basalts and the sandstones is abrupt, but it appears to be conformable. Now, the Husky Creek is they're beautiful braided river type sandstones with nice planar and trough cross bedding and plain bedded sandstones with fairly unimodal paleocurrent patterns. The rocks are very immature, as one might expect. They're sitting right on top of a flood basalt, so that's what they look like. They're lithic aaronites derived from weathering of the underlying basalts. There is also evidence for deposition under semi-arid climate, including aeolian dune cross bedding with wind ripple lamination. And we also see carbonate concretions, which I'd interpret as caliche, and gypsum pseudomorphs in some of the mudstones. So I mentioned before that there are intercalated flows within the sandstones. We came across 2 or 3 in our trip down the river. And at the margins of these, you see well-developed peperitic textures suggesting the lavas were erupted onto soft, wet sediment. A quick look at detrital zircon geochronology. These are 2 samples. I think we did 4, but I'll show the basal sandstone sample and the uppermost one. And surprisingly, we found this big peak at 1270 in the lowermost unit. Now these rocks are being derived from weathering of a basalt. So to find this big peak in zircon ages suggests that that there must be a felsic component to this magmatism. And we haven't found any flows in the succession that are felsic in composition. So either it's been weathered away or we just didn't find it. So it's kind of curious to find this. Certainly up section, we see a more varied provenance signature, which indicates we're getting derivation from more distal sources and just generally expansion of the basin, which is what one would expect as you go up section. So now move briefly from the Hornby Bay Basin into the Amundsen Basin, and the contact between the two is represented by an unconformity between the Rae Group and the Coppermine River Group. And in the Coppermine River, it's a very subtle contact here. There's a thin pebble lag, and that's about all you see, but the layers are actually parallel. So it's a paraconformity. But if you look at the map pattern here, you can see that there are a number of folds and faults here, which are acutely truncated at this unconformity. So it's clearly a significant break in time, and it's the contact between the 2 basins and sequence A and B. So a quick look at the rocks at the base of the Rae Group. And here we have a couple of the samples of what the escape rapids formation looks like. And it's a succession of sandstones and dark shales deposited in a shallow ocean or inland sea. There's a strat section that I made from some of the drill core that had been drilled in the area. There were mining companies here looking for red bed or Cooper-Schiefer type copper mineralization. So, so again, we had drill core to work with and do rhenium osmium dating. So that's some of the core that we used for the dating. And I sent samples to Alan Rooney's lab at Yale, and we were able to get a nice depositional age of around 1068 for the escape rapids formation. And the nice thing about this is the sample comes from about 20 meters above the very base of the Rae Group. So this gives us a nice lower age limit on the entire Shaler supergroup succession here. So the base is 1068, and the top is the Mackenzie flood basalts, which are around 720 million years. So that tells us that this entire succession was deposited in about 350 million years. And so the basin formed at the time of the amalgamation of Rodinia, and then it broke up at the time of the breakup of Rodinia. So this is just an image here from Dave Evans's paper with Ross Mitchell back in 2011. And I've superimposed what I think is it's a cartoon basically of what I think this interior basin looked like at the time before Rodinia broke up. So you have another number of elements of that basin exposed in Australia and China, in Morocco, and also in the Borden Basin in northern Canada. Okay, I will finish off by looking at some of the paleontology of the Rae Group. And this was work that was also done by Corentin and Laurent. And in these shales, he found an assemblage of 26 species of eukaryotes, which is the highest diversity in rocks of this age thus far. So these include forms which show perforations. You can see these holes here, which he interprets to be evidence for eukaryovery, which is just a fancy word for cannibalism. But the most exciting thing is he found these fossils here, which he interprets to be fungi. And these would be, these are called Urosphaera chiraldi, and they are interpreted as the oldest fossil fungi on Earth. They're more than 500 million years older than previously reported unambiguous fungi. And that's consistent with molecular clock data for the emergence of the clade. And they're identified as fungi because they have this double-walled structure. And also note the branching of these tubules here, which is diagnostic of fungi. And the other piece of evidence is that the cell walls are composed of chitin, which was identified by FTIR spectroscopy. So this discovery created quite a splash in the media, and in particular, as a Canadian, we got written up in Cottage Life magazine, which is, I think, the pinnacle of our research. So I'll just end off by showing a few pictures of our travels down the Coppermine River. This is the day we started out on Dismal Lakes. This is the group here with our boats overladen with equipment and food. And there we are setting up our first camp on Dismal Lake. And this is what the camp looked like from above, from a drone image. Those streaks there are made by caribou during their migration. And that's a picture on Dismal Lakes at about 1 o'clock in the morning, just after we'd finished setting up our camp. We got stuck out in a bad storm for a couple of days and couldn't move, and the weather cleared at about 9 o'clock at night. So after dinner, we packed up and went on our way to the next spot. And this is a picture lower down on the river where one of these Franklin diabase sills cuts across the river. And wherever those sills cross the river, you got some very nice sets of rapids like these ones here. And you can see the canoes here down below. This is another drone image. So that's it. Lots of people to thank. It was a fantastic trip, but a lot of work to organize. So, and I haven't been back to the Arctic since. So, questions?
All right, thanks, Rob. Really fun talk. We'll go ahead and give people some time to gather their thoughts. Looks like Paul pointed out that Lands Forlorn was compiled by photographs and text by geologist Rob Hildebrand.
Yeah, that's right. And he reissued that book, but I found that it's out of print now. So if anybody knows a way to get a hold of it, I'd be curious to know, because I just have a PDF copy of it.
And it looks like Francis McDonald has a question now. So go ahead.
Hey, Rob.
Hey, Francis.
Hey, it was great to see that that data and see those images. That's really exciting, and the evidence for potential impact. And I was just curious, where you're going here with that. Are you searching for any basins around 1270 that may have some impact ejecta, or what's the next test?
Well, I think you guys working out in the Ogilvy Mountains might, if you get a chance to go back, that might be one place to
Yeah.
look for a 1270 MA impact layer. But yeah, no, I think that's an obvious thing to look for, maybe on other parts of the world too, besides Canada.
Yeah, and I guess could the impact, at that scale, you'd expect a multi-ring structure instead of a chord uplift. Is there any possibility of any other basement rings to go after? If you can find or drill anywhere more interior, you'd expect some shock material there. So, you'd expect some more uplift inboard.
Yeah, I mean, the unfortunate thing is everything's covered by younger Proterozoic and Paleozoic rocks. So even to look for things like shock, shock cones and stuff like that, you just don't see it because the exposed rocks are too far away, I think. So yeah, I mean, if we had some more sophisticated, higher resolution geophysics, you might be able to see those things. But right now, there's no money to do any field work in the Arctic. So maybe somewhere down the line, if we can get a paper written, so I have Tony's 2/3 finished manuscript on some of the stuff I showed, and I would really like to try and get that published. So I'm trying to work with Mike Hamilton and find some time to finish Tony's work and at least get the idea out there and published so people can test it.
Great, thanks.
Okay, we've got one in the chat from Lyle Nelson. What is driving 1070 subsidence related to Rodinia amalgamation, a bit younger than mid-continent rift?
What is driving 1070 subsidence? That's a good question. What drives subsidence in any intercratonic basin? That's a subject that's been bandied about by lots of people, and I don't see a definitive answer for that. We don't see any evidence for rifting at that time, at least not on that contact. So, some kind of thermal blanketing effect in supercontinents, some kind of density contrast under there that creates regional thermal subsidence. But the mechanisms are varied and many.
Okay, Richard, maybe next. Greg had mentioned in the chat that he has a question, but you can come up next, Richard.
Yeah,
thanks.
I'm unmuted now. So Rob, that was great. I really enjoyed it. For some years now, I've been citing the Mara Formation, I think it is, at Bathurst Inlet, as the oldest known caliche. Now, the ones you described today aren't nearly as old. I think they're almost 1.6. And I do have some others at 1.4. But is there any caliche? What's the status of that Mara Formation now? And is there any caliche bearing redbed sequence in what you've been looking at here?
So the Mara Formation is part of the Kilhigok Basin. So it's probably around, it's a bit older, like 1.8, 1.85, something like that. Whereas the ones I showed are from the Husky Creek Formation, which is part of it's intercalated with these flood basalts. So it's around 1.27. So it's a fair bit younger. I have not come across anything older than that, certainly not in that part of the world. So I didn't even know about the ones in the Mara Formation. So
are those Mara Formation caliches still thought to be okay? Campbell and Cecile wrote about them a long time ago. I don't know if anyone's been there since, have they?
Yeah, my colleague Alessandro Yelpi has been working up in that area, but I don't think he got up into the Mara Formation. I could be wrong. Maybe he's listening in here. I don't know. Yeah. No, yeah, apart from that, I know of no one that's done or is doing work in there.
And you showed pictures of gypsum too. Do they look like desert roses? Because it's kind of odd that through most of the Proterozoic, we seem to have a mix of gypsids and calcids, two different kinds of soils.
Yes, the mudstones that are in the upper part of the Escape Rapids Formation are chock-a-block full of, they look like roses. They're pseudomorph now, but and some of them are tiny, but they're very rose shaped, and they have the morphology of gypsum crystal, but they're pseudomorph by carbonate, calcite.
And are they porphyroblastic? Do they have grains inside them, kind of like the Oklahoma desert roses and the Permian?
I have not done petrography on them, so I couldn't say. But the ones I showed are pretty large, but higher up in the section where they're more common, they're very, very small. They're like just maybe 3 or 4 millimeters across, and they're in these thick sequence of finely laminated red mudstones, which is bizarre. It's like some kind of restricted basin environment of very quiet water. So kind of looks like a lacustrine setting to me, and a semi-arid climate.
Fascinating. Thanks.
I think Alessandro responded to what you asked before about, or he said, not that I remember, Robbie did some petrography. I'm guessing you know who Robbie is.
Well, Robbie is our master's student who did he did a master's thesis on the Husky Creek Formation, but I was referring to the Mara Formation because Alessandro had been over in Kugluktuk Basin a couple of years ago, whether he saw those or not. I have not seen them.
Okay. Richard, do you have a question?
Not in the Mara. Not in the Mara.
Oh.
No.
Hey, Rob, that was a superb tour through the stratigraphy and the volcanics, etc. It was really neat to felt like I was there. It was really great to see it and see the detailed descriptions. Just one comment. I've been thinking about, puzzling about Tony's results for some time now, and it's certainly hugely intriguing. The one thing is, I just don't, from our broader work on plumes and particularly giant radiating dike swarms, I don't quite see how one generates a 2,000 kilometer radius swarm from an impact. And part of it comes from our work on Venus, where we see lots of radiating swarms of a similar scale to the Mackenzie, say, and then we see entirely separate looking features because of the absence of surface erosion of things that are clearly impacts. And so we're not seeing any, in case of these, large impacts, some large impacts there, maybe not quite as large, but large impacts, we don't see any evidence for radiating swarms. So I keep puzzling about, what it means, but the aspect of the radiating swarms is an aspect that I think is going to be hard to address with the Mackenzie case.
I agree, but it's just explaining these other features that I've showed here. I mean, the whole idea of the mantle plume, I think it's possible to have a mantle plume there, and I think maybe what's not to say that the meteorite impact could have triggered the plume.
Yeah. Well,
right?
Yeah, I returned to Venus a little bit because we see places where we never see a kind of a juxtaposition of some impact features with what is clearly kind of a plume-related radiating swarm, major flood basalt sequence on Venus. I'm open to this sort of thing, but we don't see good examples of it in a place where we have no surface erosion, so we can really see kind of the surface expression of things quite clearly in their superposition or not. But what's the one question is, what scale of impact would actually, if you had a random, well, of course it's the same timing, so that's the puzzle, isn't it? Yeah, I'm lost, but I just keep coming back to the radiating swarm aspect. It's a hard thing but It's obviously something that needs to be explained, and kind of an endogenic, or kind of, it's hard to achieve the correct pressures and the pressures anyway from terrestrial kind of explosive volcanism, I guess. Anyway, it remains an important mystery, and certainly, the data should get out there. So go for it.
I'll do my best.
In Tony's memory, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what's spurring me on for sure. Because he'd been working on this paper for like 10 years, and I was bugging him as Tony. He was such a perfectionist, and Tony, let's just get this out here, get the idea out there. It doesn't have to be perfect, it's just get it out there so people can take pot shots at it. That's how great science works, is people put ideas out there that may be crazy, and then people go out and test it, right? So, but he wanted to have all his ducks in a row, and look what happened.
Yeah, well, it would be a spur, would be a spur to sort of further work to search for additional shock features, and that would be a more conclusive test to, see. Shock
that and what Francis pointed out, looking for an ejecta horizon. If you had an impact that big to create a 500 kilometer diameter crater, you would have a fair bit of material kicked up in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
So maybe a question to Robert, but also Richard. Do you have other leap events at 1270 in other parts of the world, or is it only unique to Arctic Canada?
Well, we think we see the continuation of it in southern Siberia. We got something that's slightly younger at 1260. That's a big 300-meter wide ultramafic dike in southern Siberia, but we think was probably attached at the time. There's the Central Scandinavian Dolerite complex in Baltica that starts at 1270, but has a couple other pulses that gets you down to about 1250. That's it that I think of at the moment. So it's not entirely unique, because there is and then there's the stuff on the eastern coast in Labrador, the Harp dikes at 1270, and which are potentially, relatable to a broader province that includes the Central Scandinavian Dolerite complex. So there is a second distinct region of 1270 as a first pulse, but then a couple other pulses down to 1250.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so Paul had followed up in the chat on potential cause of Rae gap subsidence, or suggesting it at least, eclogitization of the basalt crustal mafic layer related to Coppermine lavas.
In that regard, can I mention there's a BSc student who's doing, Caitlin, who's doing some geophysical modeling across parts of the Mackenzie, or that area, to kind of constrain the reason for the gravity anomaly and in the pattern and the annular trough as well. So we've got some geophysical modeling underway.
I think, Richard, have you been in touch with Graham Pearson? Because I know he's got some students working on that exact problem.
Okay. No, I haven't been. I guess I will be. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because I think I'm in touch with one of his master's students who's actually modeling the. I think it's the Mackenzie. Well, some other mafic magnetic events also, but Graham's had a long-standing interest in the Mackenzie, so had lots of students working on it. So
I'll get in touch. Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
The one thing about this, oh, good, never mind.
No, you can go ahead. I was just looking for more.
This idea, the idea of the sort of eclogization of the lower sort of magmatic underplate is a way of kind of, as things cool down, to end up causing a basin forming above where there was a mantle plume kind of features. It would be fun to find some more examples of that. It's been talked about the part of the the Keweenawen event under the Michigan basin. That's sort of been described as a potential link to the Michigan basin depression, but it's been hard to find other examples, clear examples of that kind of what makes a lot of sense, because we know that magmatic underplates are a huge part of so many different lifts, but we haven't really seen a lot of good examples, any real good examples of resulting basin formation that could be kind of attributable to that sort of mechanism. You know, it'd be nice because we'd like to be able to recognize the former location of plume-related events by subsequent sort of intracrotonic-like basins, but anyway, so that's we'd like to look at things like the Hudson Bay or the Williston Basin or Illinois Basin and just, you know, find more definitive kind of links to an underplate kind of story. But
We need some xenoliths. We need some xenoliths, some younger kimberlites.
yeah, that would help. That would be great. That was certainly important for, you know, the kimberlites and the slave cratons showing Mackenzie ages. That's certainly been diagnostic for the underplate.
How long
Yeah.
is eclogitization will take place? Is 200 million years difference is too large to explain basin?
No, the
What's
garnet forming reactions are very slow.
It's pretty metastable. It doesn't, it can be quite delayed in terms of the, or is it an automatic sort of process, or does it actually, sometimes it doesn't necessarily, it would seem to be in the right pressure depth for that formation, but it doesn't necessarily end up happening in some cases.
Yeah, the garnet forming reactions have a kinetics, serious kinetics issues.
Yeah, okay. And the one thing, the other part of it is that the you know, the thermal plume takes some period of time for the thermal anomaly to disappear. So that can also, as that happens, potentially lead to loss of the topographic uplet and maybe inversion under certain cases. If you push a lot of magma out from the plume region, then when the things cool again, you can end up with a basin. But
Okay, Daryl has a question.
Yeah, it's related to this Washburn Lake dike again. Like, I'm not really sure of the logic for using a meteorite to impact to create the intrusive, which is essentially altered by this impact. I mean, if this is a Mackenzie dike and it's got these features, then surely the impact is post Mackenzie or sin Mackenzie, and is not necessarily the triggering feature.
Well, it's dated at the same, basically gives the same age as the Mackenzie. So it's a melt generated by the event. So it's a dike. It's like these Sudbury offset dikes. It's part of the magmatic event, but it's not a mafic dike in the sense of a gabbro. It's more like it's granophyre with these chunks of really melted rocks. I mean, and Tony showed me reams and reams and reams of SEM images of all these different textures. I showed you just a skim off the top of some of the stuff he showed me, but he'd also looked at stuff that there's a weird granophyre within the flood basalt sequence. It has all kinds of, like, it's 120 meters thick and it's got all kinds of weird textures in it. So these are, I mean, presumably there would be more of these dikes around, but you just don't see them because they're buried by the younger rocks. But they're part of the event. They're part of the reaction to the event.
Okay.
All right.
well, one of the
If anybody wants to, sorry,
just
go
one
ahead.
other thing. One of the things that's yeah, that's an interesting point Paul makes about the melt sheet being crustal in origin, not mantle, whereas the Mackenzie stuff is certainly mantle. Just wondering, we're finding that association with many large igneous provinces, Siberian traps and others these hydrothermal breccia pipes that represent, interaction of sills with volatile-rich sediments. And these are quite explosive. I don't know what kind of pressures they produce, but they are quite explosive. And they brecciate their way to the surface from depths as great as 9 kilometers in some cases. The Siberian Trap has 700 of these types of features or more. And I don't know, and these are not necessarily hugely hot, but maybe there's a variation in textures. Anyway, there's a huge brecciation component that can be associated with these brecciated pipes. Now, the dike is, your Washburn dike is somewhat linear, but the kind of any kind of explosive sense to it.
No, it
Yeah.
doesn't. It's clearly an intrusive rock. It's not a
Not
breccia
brecciated.
per se, isn't it?
Okay.
We found some of those things. I didn't even remember. We found some of these breccias up on Victoria Island associated with the Kugluktuk.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've not looked at the Mackenzie rocks in any detail at all. I mean, you've seen more of it than I have, Richard.
Yeah.
So, there may be components that have those features.
Yeah. But yeah. All right.
Okay, well, if anybody has anything else they'd like to bring up or talk
Yeah,
about.
I'd like to make one point. It's very tempting to go to the Coppermine River in June because there are no mosquitoes. But don't do that because it's the only open water in the country and every grizzly bear in the territory is down there fishing. So later in the summer, it's not a problem because they're up eating ground squirrels on the plateau, but the Coppermine River is not a safe place to camp in June.
Well, we saw 12 grizzly bears on our trip, so luckily we were on the water when we saw them. So, and well, actually, a few of our people that were doing traverses ran into a few, but luckily they, as usual, run the other way when they get a whiff of you.
What's your general defense? Do you come with a lot of bear spray, or does somebody bring guns, or?
Open a prayer.
Raise your
No,
hand. It makes
your
you look a
defense is to
little
let
big.
your
Body
defense is
odor.
you let them know you're there, basically. And anytime I've run into grizzlies, as soon as they get a whiff of you there, they'll take off. But I've been lucky. We did have guns with us, yes, but we didn't have to use them, luckily.
Just stand there and be calm.
Yep. Yeah, don't panic. It's the worst. They like to, somebody running away from them, that's like, oh, great, this is fun.
It's like
Gary Eisbacher used to lecture them in the Mackenzies, and then they would go to sleep.
But Gary Lag lectured everybody, and he was an absolutely brilliant geologist. And he's still alive.
even the best geologists, they lecture bears.
Your eye spot.
All right. Well, great. That was really cool, Rob. Thanks for that. Seems we're all done with discussion now. So
Thank you for the
look forward to seeing
opportunity.
you all next week. And until then, stay safe.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks. It was great.